Hi! I wanted to talk a little bit about suicide awareness. As a survivor of suicide, or the survivor of the grieving process, due to a very close loved one who committed suicide. Sorry, it's hard. This is like I'm just rolling with this and recording, and I haven't, bullet pointed or scripted any of this. This is just me talking about my grieving process in relation to losing a very close friend, the fallout I had with friends and family going through that process, and my experience of observing how society just views suicide as a subject. And what I immediately assumed when this person committed suicide is that in our politically correct culture, um, with these kind of hashtag suicide awareness campaigns like up on subways, on Facebook walls, social media all the time, you would think that scapegoating wouldn't be a common trend in our culture, but you find that so many people, the angry mob still exists for suicides. There is a person that always gets blamed. The lack of understanding as to why the person, made that choice is still kind of like just a lot of people dismiss the person's experience prior to them making that choice, and they see it as selfish. Whereas if you were in the front seat and you were there every night with the drunk phone calls, or, we're at the person's house while they're throwing up drunk, or, going on hikes with them and them explaining that they feel that friends and family don't understand them, that you're the only one who understands them, that, the talk therapist wasn't a good match, and then, trying to sympathize with them as much as you can to make them feel seen and heard, but at the same time, how much can you sympathize before you're just enabling depression? And then you yourself have no experience with somebody who's committed suicide, so you don't know the warning signs before it happens. And then you being in this example, I was the ex-girlfriend, but still a very close friend for like almost 10 years, and I got blamed for it when that event happened, and the friends and family decided in their grief, that the best course of action, the most justified course of action that they could take, they felt they rationalized was a healthy response, was to not allow me to be at the funeral services or go help pack up the house. So then that leads, people, to assume, well, I must have done something for the friends and family to react that way. But no, this is another reason why I'm talking about this. Sometimes people act in incredibly irrational, like Lord of the Flies paralleled ways. People that you went on vacations with, that you watched their house, you fed their cats, you fed their pets, you were, you went there to make dinner, made holiday cookies with, had gift exchanges with for years. Like people you felt were family, that were an extension of family. When shit hits the fan and something that's so taboo like this happens, I got to experience firsthand the trauma of people that I didn't ever expect would ever hurt me, to when I needed that peer support, I was the one who got ousted and scapegoated, while the entire rest of the group got to have their closure in the funeral services. They, at that point in time, only had the empathetic capacity to do that, and that's how that's how they had peace with their son or their brother committing suicide, is that they blamed another person. Therefore, they didn't have to reflect on the childhood, or they didn't have to reflect on the fact that he needed money and I didn't have the money to help him out, and then they didn't offer the money, or they didn't know what was going on because they weren't even calling him. They weren't even calling him. They didn't even know what was going on. And so instead of taking responsibility for their lack of involvement, and being so terrified of, the small Christian community that they grew up in, its feelings about the suicide, it was easy to scapegoat the Catholic ex-girlfriend, and they're all Seventh-day Adventists, so it's like, it's fine. But through my grief, there's been a lot of growth in trying to experience life without somebody who was so monumental in it. I mean, him and I used to go running and used to go on hikes and, used to go shopping and used to go out to eat like almost every day, even though we weren't even dating. And then people would say that's unhealthy. So it's like people get upset when I talk about it and they're like, what gives you the authority to keep talking about it? You're making the suicide about you. Obviously, like, leave his friends and family alone. They have the right to make whatever choices regarding his final plans as they wish. But really, that's not true. This is my experience, and it is valid, and I want to say this for anybody who's experiencing grief from a suicide, who might be going through similar challenges and phases of people trying to implement their own ideas of how you should be feeling or how you should be reacting, when really it's not their choice, it's not their experience, and they can't even know what that experience is because they're not in your shoes. You know what I mean? It's literally like inconceivable for people to even like understand a fraction of what you're probably going through. If you lost your sister, if you lost your mom, if you lost your kid, if you lost like a student at school, if you lost a client, like to suicide, if you lost a coworker, it's crazy tough, and everybody goes a little nuts. I went a little nuts. I went to an intensive therapy group for a while. I had suicidal thoughts myself from the loneliness and from just the hurt of like the entire group, like the scapegoating and the mob mentality that I experienced the backlash of when that person made that choice. And then like, when you tell society that those are also taboo subjects too, like reaching out to get mental health help, which this person didn't reach out to get help because of this stigma that now I get to experience. You know what I mean? So people hear me, and I am at peace with the fact that everybody listening to this might not understand or might want to, knock on or make fun of somebody like a woman in her late 20s going on the internet and talking about this when she should have kids, and a husband. But like it's not an issue of age, and it's not an issue of, this isn't a funny subject. It's very serious. It's like on the same level as rape. It's on the same level as, Holocaust jokes. We live in a very desensitized culture where it's easy for you to click on this video and then click off like right away and then put it away in your sock drawer and then not have to think about it until it affects you. And my hope is that you reflect on what this stranger's saying online and you go, oh my God, my experience feels validated. I remember now, even if you don't fully get it, what I'm saying right now, that our society doesn't completely understand or have the right mental health system layout in place for people who are grieving through suicide. They put you on meds, and they assume that if you get a really bad therapist, they're a really great therapist. In my experience, the talk therapists I've gone to who are 40 plus, who tend to be my parents' age, they have more experience. They've been extremely helpful. When I've sat down with a talk therapist who's my age, probably just out of grad school, they haven't made some very good choices regarding my process. And I am openly saying that I feel, in several ways they were unqualified. I think their intentions were great, but I think like if you're going through grief, definitely make sure it's somebody who's older. Definitely make sure it's nobody who diagnoses the situation as, well, let's figure out what you did. If I literally had a psychiatrist say, I didn't take medication, but when I sat down to talk to somebody about it, his award-winning argument, and he said this verbatim, was, if so many people didn't want you at the funeral services, don't you think that there must have been something you were responsible for on your end? And I just blatantly and honestly said no, because I didn't. I wasn't abusive. There was no yelling in the house. When I was with him, there was no violence. There was no nitpicking or controlling. I know the parts that I was responsible for was that when he said he didn't want to go to talk therapy, I said, yeah, talk therapy isn't for everyone. Like, definitely find a different way out. Like, there are other ways, exercise and stuff, to get over depression. And I was an unqualified source of information. So if naivety is what I am guilty of, I accept that. But as far as being an abusive, counterpart in this situation, I know I myself was not that person, nor were his friends and family. And that's where I think society needs to be more aware here, is that everybody's so in their adult life when we all build this ego and our identity and our career, and we start acquiring more things, and we have to protect what we have, and then alliances become a thing, and then everybody likes to be dramatic because it fulfills some sort of sense of purpose. Then you have people who are kind of stuck in the crosshairs if suddenly they become the target for slander, for exclusion, for bullying, for harassment, for injustice. I'm talking about at the ER, emergency room, basic panic attack, reaching out, 5150 level. Like, there are people who are so ignorant of what it is to go through grief and depression. And I'm going to just say this flat out right now. We have so many suicides in this country because we can't heal those people with Western medicine. And in my experience, the only thing that actually helps in deterring suicides is somebody just to sit and listen. Just sit and be with a person. Just sit and accept a person in like their depression or like whatever struggle they're going through. To sit and like, when you sit somebody down and there's this premise of, we're going to put you on pills, we're going to diagnose, we're going to figure out what's wrong with you, what's really going on, like what are you presenting to me in my chair as a therapist, and what little red flags do I need to be looking for so I can help you? Like, when people who commit suicide tend to be highly emotionally like aware and present, and when the therapist sitting in the chair is less socially aware than the person who needs help, they definitely feel isolated and like they just want to end it. It makes the situation even worse. So what people really need to do is just hit pause and slow down, whether it's a relationship with your friends or your family or whoever this person is that's going through a hard time, that they aren't going to tell you they're suicidal, because when they're serious, they're going to do it, and they're going to plan, and they're going to be sneaky, because that's what happened. They're going to just say little things like, what if, when we die, it's just a video game, and we wake up? Or I've always wondered, like, if I just end it, what if it's like the Matrix, you know what I mean? Like, those were things that I had a conversation with a friend about, that you would think is just normal, like, millennial, like, existential banter, that we're just like contemplating existential philosophy and thought. But when it gets really, really deep and like deep, grungy, existential philosophy, it can get a little melancholy, and you need to look out for that with your friends. Because you're going to think like, oh man, that was deep. Yeah, I never thought of that. And then you're going to realize when they're talking about like, the apocalypse is going to happen in like 2025, or like Illuminati conspiracy theories, and they're just attached to like these things, like it's just not going to get better, Trump got elected president. Like, you have to look for, is there a case of hopelessness being compiled in this person's like life and relationship with you? Like, this person's walking her dogs and probably checking out what's going on. See, I love that about adult life too, is everybody likes to, be all up in your business in public and see if they need to have a part in it. Where was I? So basically what happened in my situation is I dated a guy monogamously for 4 years. We were, he sat me down and talked about kids. He had a moment where he proposed, and it kind of, like, it didn't really work. It wasn't a good time. And then him and I continued to be friends. That happened some years later. So 4 years dating monogamously, and then the final 4 years we were just friends in contact, and we had a healthy relationship. But because we had that romantic relationship off the bat, he felt comfortable opening up to me about some of the struggles he was having, where he was too embarrassed to contact his parents or his brother, or any of his friends he went to private college with. And then the stuff he did open up to them about was probably him lamenting about his relationship with me, like every guy does. And so when it came down to suddenly he kills himself, his brother's flying down from Washington, his parents are coming up from Los Angeles, and they have no idea what's going on. And then his friends, who are all take private jets to Tahoe on the weekend, and none of them have worked a minimum wage in their life. They don't tip waiters, they say Mexican women are overbred, and they complain about eating Denny's because it gives them food poisoning. I'm talking about those kind of white privileged assholes. They were not going to take responsibility for not knowing what the fuck was going on with this person who killed themselves. They weren't going to take any shit from his parents, and so they just pointed the finger at me. Because I'm the only one who worked a service job in her life, and they knew that my parents aren't cardiologists in a cliquey Seventh-day Adventist neighborhood, so it's like, who gives a fuck, if we don't invite her to the funeral. So that's basically what happened. And then everybody in my life, my hemisphere, is like, holy shit, Stephen killed himself, and, like, women are crazy. So yeah, Emily must have been a crazy ex-girlfriend. So it's like society, like, tacked this label onto me, too, that if the parents, like, if such a hot guy committed suicide and his friends and family didn't want me there, and I'm female and I'm an opinionated, like, quote-unquote bitch, because that's what people like to label women who are, like, outgoing and don't lean on their looks or try to dominate a social situation. Like, I'm actually just a sweet person who is open with you and everyone, and that makes me vulnerable. I got labeled crazy psycho ex-girlfriend. So that's like, this is kind of what's been going on the last couple years of me grieving. In that time, I've had so many people, like, whether it's at work or a roommate or, like, family, just throw out, like, have justified poor treatment that I haven't experienced at any time prior in my entire life existence. Like, I'm talking, like, a roommate who broke a lease, but, it's okay that she didn't break a lease. We both completed the year lease. And then at the end of the lease, instead of having, like, a normal conversation with our landlord that we didn't want to continue, this girl, who's, like, 33, decided to bring her sister-in-law over to pick a fight because she said that she didn't want to, basically, she didn't want to live in the house anymore, and instead of, like, I guess she needed help from family and friends to get out of, like, the year lease. So she convinced all of them that it was too unbearable to live with somebody whose ex-boyfriend committed suicide, and she told the landlord that too, and I wasn't able to re-sign on the lease. So I had an adult use that instead of somebody who hadn't matured enough to build, like, have the social competence to say, we're just not re-signing the lease, I'm sorry, and dealt with whatever lashback from her lack of preparation as an adult into how she was going to transition out of that household. She decided to shit on me. So that was unexpected and fucked up. I had a job that I really liked, and then it turned out that I shared with one of the people in management, because she grew up in that Seventh-day Adventist community, that person passed away, and then all of a sudden I got fired, like, a week later, and the premise was being tardy once. And I realized that this manager that I shared, my ex-boyfriend committed suicide. We thought about having kids. His friends and family didn't want me at the funeral. Most people would be like, that's not something you share with people at work. And then I don't share this with anybody, obviously, but I shared it with one person, and I won the lottery that this one person was one of those people that she must have told her boss. And then it was like, it was 5-star Forbes standard customer service, and I had no issues leading up to that until I shared that I had a history with losing somebody to suicide, and I had a super ignorant person get me fired a week later, because I'm not one of the better people, apparently. So I want to make this video because I'm sick of it. I'm sick of all of it. I'm sick of, because the truth of the matter is like 2 years ago, before this happened, like, I was like, the redhead who spoke a foreign language and took social science classes and now works in holistic health and is kind of a novelty and, you know, kind of spunky and confident and, you know, okay to have around. And then somebody killed themselves, and then everybody just kind of like reevaluated that whole reputation. And everything that I found positive about myself got twisted into being something negative. And I'm currently going through the process of trying to reclaim my own self-confidence and my own, like, a case of self-love, I guess, which is super corny. Um, but the young people on Instagram will appreciate that, all the hashtag self-love quotes. But I really, yeah, I literally have experienced, it's like, I guess this is what it is to become an adult too, is like you get parents who are labeled as alcoholics and their kids can never get over the grudge they have that, you know, their father used to drink when they were growing up, and then forever alone, like that man will always be reminded that he fucked up that kid's life because he just couldn't stop drinking. Or then, like, you know, women who, you know, give up their kids, or, you know, their mom was never around. I don't know, it's like those are two very similar traumatic incidents. I just know, or like it's just crazy. Like, I guess this is my first experience as an adult of having something super screwed up happen, and then having to own the role as antagonist when I know I'm a good person. I just happened to be in the hot seat when something out of my control happened, and then I happened to be labeled by everyone and like used by everyone to get through a really, like, you know, unexpected, depressing event. And then it's like, and the more I talk about it, the more everybody's like, you're making it about you. And it's like, no, I'm not. It's it's crazy. So what could have happened is him and I could have we could have got married when we both didn't want that. And then everybody would be like, oh, he was her husband. Now she has the right. Now she has the authority to lament and have this affect her so much. When really that's not the case and everything's not black and white. It's just a weird thing to have happen. It's weird to have somebody who's like your best friend decide to make that choice, and then you feel betrayed, and then you have the world trying to convince you that they're a selfish person for doing that, but you know they're not a selfish person. They were just in a lot of pain and trying to convince people and correct that social stigma. Then you have to convince people that there was no abuse going on and that you were just the target of a cliquey group of private college students being shitheads, because they knew they could be sharky, and they won, in that little community. And it's fine because they're going to live on that hill their whole life. They're never going to move away, and they're just going to sit on the assets that their parents accumulated, and they're going to do their little entrepreneurial pursuits there, and they're not going to go to New York or San Francisco like I have and actually like have a fresh start somewhere, because they can't do that, because they, you know, shitty people are often very scared, and they're often, you know, rooted in what they feel is safe. So that's part of the reason, that's what contributed to them reacting so aggressively, is they can't even enable gossip like that to go around, that their grade school friend shot himself and that they weren't there for the alcoholism. Emily was, but not his best childhood guy friends. They can't enable that kind of gossip to go around because they you know, they're never leaving that place. So that's yeah. Anyway, people can be very scary. People are going to try and diagnose you going through grief. People are going to try and tell you what you can't expect out of life after going through grief. People are going to try and abuse you and use your grief as an excuse to treat you poorly. People are going to try and feed into the drama of you going through grief, and you have to catch yourself before you allow yourself to go through that downward spiral of becoming dramatic. And in that case, you are making the grief about you. And you're going to be alone, and you might lose a lot of friends going through grief, either because the first hit of them hearing that somebody committed suicide, they're just gonna cut off contact completely because it's an unconventional subject in a very politically correct world, and people think they can handle that kind of subject. They pass it around online and share it on Facebook, like, suicide awareness. But when it comes down to like people who are actually like in their real living life, they're going to back away from that because it's too much and they don't want to get tied into it. Or they're going to be there for the grief, and then at one point you sharing is going to be too much and they're going to have to put distance. So all that stuff's going to happen, and it's completely normal. All that sounds like a nightmare, because it is. But it can be a very beautiful transformative process. And what I've actually gotten out of this is that I never thought that I would be the person that I am sitting here talking to this camera right now. It built character for me. In the time that I would have spent dating or like doing the same, it's crazy. So instead of dating and all the stuff I would be doing at 27, I've been working, and I've had really incredible success at work. I've worked at so many beautiful venues. I've had so many beautiful experiences in trying to fill that gap in the last couple years. And I'm going to be honest, for the first year, I cried myself to sleep every day. Probably every day for the first year of missing that person and going through the social ostracism regarding that incident. So I think and you get repressed memories, you get all sorts of crazy things. You're going to have moments where, you're going to see somebody and they're just going to have the eyes or the feet of the person, and it sounds fucking creepy and weird, but you're going to have moments where, like, a car will drive by, or that's the person's car. Like, you're going to get triggered into memories and experiences, and it's an incredibly painful, out of this world phenomenon to heal from grief, and you don't come out of it the same person. So what I would recommend is that you find somebody that you trust, who validates your experience in whatever it is, that's going to help you and isn't going to try and push whatever. Make sure they're there for you and they're not just opening their textbook. A lot of talk. I'm a social science major. I've gotten a lot of mental health help. You don't have to. I've never taken meds. You don't have to take meds. But, the older the therapist, the better success, the higher the success rate I've experienced. There are therapists who are going to open up a textbook and try to diagnose you. I called somebody to ask about an appointment once in San Francisco, and his selling line was, I can prescribe Xanax. I didn't even tell him what my situation was. It was the first 5 minutes of the phone call. He goes, by the way, I do provide Xanax. So that was just, a person who's, kind of helping in the recreational pharmaceutical drug use problem we have here in our culture. So be really careful who you go to talk to, and do get the help. And then if you aren't ready to go get the help, just don't get the help. I don't know, just it's whatever your situation is. And it's whatever your situation is, even if that last bit seems contradictory. I hope some of that helps someone. The funny thing about suicides is, I gotta stop talking here because this has ran a little long. Suicide, I'm gonna be really real with you. It's everyone's fault. It is. It's my fault. It's his family's fault. It's everybody's fault connected to him. Even the people who got to go to the funeral and they're like, oh man, Stephen was such a cool guy. It's still their fault too. But at the same time, it's none of their fault. You know what I mean? It's none of those people's fault. Like, it's not his friend's fault. It's not his parents' fault. It's not my fault. It's a weird truth that can't be defined as black and white. It's everyone's fault, but it's nobody's fault. And it happened, and now we're expected to live life. And that's like, that's what it is. So, if you're going through this process, I'm sorry. I'm excited for whatever person you become. Keep God close to you. I don't think I've gotten through a single day without opening some YouTube video with, prayer or scripture. I listen to Christian music. Definitely tap out of anything dark and dreary. You're going to go through phases where you might feel a little angry, and just move with whatever person is emerging out of you, as long as it's not hurting somebody else, and just go with the dance. It's just the dance. So, yeah. Good luck. God loves you. It's not your fault. it's not your fault, but it's everyone's fault. But more so, it's not your fault. And I hope that if you know somebody going through depression, you don't push the job off onto somebody else. Don't brush off the conversation because you feel like it's too much, that, go get a therapist, or don't you have somebody else to talk to about this. That lack of love, that lack of patience in that moment could be the very conversation that causes somebody to sit and let somebody hurt. Put yourself second for just a moment, even if it confuses you and it's something you completely understand. Just be with someone, and you could save someone's life. Okay, so yeah, because we're all here for a very short amount of time, and God just wants us to learn how to see each other and treat each other with respect. That's all this phase is, before we go whoop or whoop. Like, that's all it is. We're here to party, have a good time, learn how to be respectful and responsible, and see each other and accept each other 100%, no matter what that experience is. Not condemn or diagnose anybody as a sinner or mentally ill. Like, that's literally what the point of life is, I've come to realize. Is just, you just love people, and you just kind of breathe and sit here and do what you love. And that's it. So, a lot of talking. Hope that helped. And take it easy on yourself. Okay? Rant over. Emily out.